Peter Nordeen first traveled to Meherabad in the early 70s, and since then he has been amassing a wealth of information, facts, data, anecdotes from a variety of sources. And he's gotten to the point where he is clearly an authority and a valued resource on people, places, and events surrounding Meher Baba. Just Google Peter you'll find a number of YouTubes on a number of presentations. And as you also see in a moment, he's a wonderful speaker. He has authored several books and contributed to many publications on Baba, and he has written and produced films on Baba, including the 2003 biographical documentary, God in Human Form, The Life and Work of Avatar Meher Baba, and You Alone Exist in 2005. So here's Peter with part one on early Mandali at early Meherabad. Enjoy. Jai Baba.
Thank you for inviting us. Gee, I don't know who that person was you were describing. I am not a trained academic. I went to India first, just after I had turned 20 years old, later in 1974. What I was interested in is being around those people who had dedicated their lives to Meher Baba, just to imbibe that. Fortunately, I had a good memory, and people asked me why that is. I said, I didn't clutter it with a lot of other extraneous information, otherwise known as education. I was open and receptive to whatever I could hear there. But as many of you will recall, we took that time with them casually. We weren't concerned about recording so many things. I just took it for granted that other people had done that through the years, and they had to some extent. But after the old Mandali passed away, I think Khorshid was the last one, some of us realized that we had missed some of the details. Things would come up and we would say, if only we could ask, they're all gone. And I realized that we could lose a lot more if we didn't start paying attention and giving it the due diligence. So those few of us who had that great gift of the exposure to Baba's old Mandali have the responsibility at least to retain context. Our generation has that responsibility. I know you've asked me to start with Mandali and early Meherabad. We will do that. But before we begin that, I would like to go back to give you an idea of some of the early personalities who are involved in the story and their interesting connections with each other and with this God game. We're going to do this by looking at photographic images, photographs, one of the great gifts in this Advent, and they allow us a great record of so many things, something we don't have from past Advents. This is one way of retaining context. Let's go to the first image. This is Sarosh Shevak's Ganji, the man in the turban from Iran. That is his wife, Pirozha. The boy is their son, Kekushru, and the daughter is Gulnar. This photograph was taken about 1889. Sarosh Ganji came from Iran. He had a shop in Bombay for some time. It was good in business, but was not happy with his worldly partners and ended up in Pune around the time just before Shariarji arrived from the Rajasthan desert and began his worldly life there with his family, his sister there in Pune. So at that point, it seems they would have known each other. Sarosh Shevaks was a spiritually inclined person. At the time of that photograph in 1889, they were most likely in Ahmednagar by that point. He was sent to Ahmednagar to care for the Parsi Dharamshala there. This photograph was taken, if you may be able to see the board there, in December of 1899. It is an opening celebration for this supply depot by B.J. Irani Company. Behram Jamshetji Irani, Behram Jamshetji, is the man sitting there on the left, and you'll see another man with his elbow on his shoulder. This is B.J. Irani, Behramji Jamshetji. He was the maternal grandfather of Goher and Katie, and also of Franey, Adi Jr.'s second wife. He was also an older relative of the man you see standing before the sign with the hat. That is Kaikushru also. But this Kaikushru is known as Kaikushru Elder. He married the sister of our other Kaikushru, the girl you saw in the first photograph, Gulnar. They were the parents of Sarosh, who is named after his grandfather, Sarosh Irani, our Mandali man. Now, if we look at the other Kaikushru, the hefty man with his elbow on the shoulder of Vijay Irani, he is the father of Rustam and Adike Irani, Baba's close male disciples also. So they were first cousins to Sarosh. And they were all Mandali people. And he married Gulmai. So now you should be sufficiently confused by this point. You have one Kaikushru marrying Gulnar and one Kaikushru marrying Gulmai, and one is friendly and one is not. Kaikushru Elder was a very good man, but he was adamantly opposed to Meher Baba from at least 1923. This photograph, however, is important for another reason. Something we had been looking for many years was a photograph of Gilroy Shaw. And you see him, it seems, inadvertently caught here in this event. He's the fakir-looking person sitting to the right of the photograph with scarf on his head, down here with garland. And for a few reasons, we are sure that this is Gilroy Shaw. One is because he is sitting there in a prominent position with these British people, but there's another reason why we are quite sure it's him. This man is Bapu Saheb. He was a Jivan Mukta in Ahmednagar. He would go to a tea shop almost daily that was owned by the two brothers-in-law. The two Kaikushrus were in business together. They also had a tea shop there, not too far from what we know as the trust compound. And he would go there daily. As Gulmai said, he would throw some coins on the table and mutter some swear words and take his cup of tea. They knew he was spiritually advanced, but Baba is the one who told us that he was actually a perfect one. When Sarosh Shivaks died in 1903, Bapu Saheb came to the door of the family's home and demanded the clothes of his devotee. So he was given the clothes of Sarosh Shivaks after he died. And this is how we know there was some connection there. I'm telling you this so you can know these interesting, fascinating connections between these early personalities and how they're all connected to these spiritually advanced persons. So Kaikushru Sarosh, that is Adike Irani's father, had the exposure and the familiarity with these spiritually advanced personalities, although he was generally just a worldly man. His father was spiritually inclined, and the background was there. This is a regenerated image done by Stephanie Shepard from a few different photographs and other images. This is how the water tank on the hill would have looked before 1927 at Meherabad. During World War I, you may know that Meherabad was a military camp. It was a POW camp, and this is how it came to be that. Ahmednagar was a big military center, and there was a big POW camp in Ahmednagar. It was for mainly merchant marine European people, and they lived much better in that POW camp than the average Indian. We won't go into the details, but it was quite comfortable. If there was a fence there, it was to keep people out, not to keep people in. They would much prefer to be in Ahmednagar, especially in the winter, rather than the trenches in Europe. But at one point in 1916, it seems, a case or two of plague had broken out in Ahmednagar. And the British, who were very proper and organized people, followed their protocol. And their protocol said that since there was an infectious disease that had broken out, inoculation was necessary for all of the POWs. So there were several hundred of these POWs who refused to have inoculation. Remember, some of them were German, and Germany was the home of homeopathy. Whatever the philosophy was, they declined to have the inoculation, which was their right, and therefore the next step was to create a quarantine camp some distance away from the city in an isolated place. And this spot was picked. It was close to the road, close to the railway, and it was near a water supply. This double water tank was constructed to allow them to pull through the long dry periods that were well experienced in this area by that point. The British had been in Ahmednagar district for over 100 years at this point. So they knew what they had to do to survive. The water main was down into a well that was near the riverbank, near Arangaon, and it was pumped in through a long pipeline into this front room, which is now the library there. The main room you see in the middle there was the valve room. And the flagman would signal to the pump man about a half a mile away when to turn on and when to shut off the pump. Each side would be filled up. Now we know those big tanks as the East Room and the West Room. But this is an example of how it would have looked before the whole thing was developed. During World War I, then, that camp was finally constructed about 1917, we believe. And the two kaikushrus who were in business would supply the camp with different things. One thing was light bulbs. Also, they would supply firewood. That was their general business. And so Kaikushru Sarosh was very familiar with this camp. It was only functioning for about a year and a half at the most. And then the camp was evacuated. What was left there was auctioned to some extent, and there was a certain man who bought property in an auction there, but the property was left, and the local people started picking away at it. And soon, the original purchaser of this property sold it to Kaikushu Sarosh, who purchased this property on his own. It wasn't purchased with his business partner. Nobody else seemed to want it, but Kaikushu Sarosh felt that this property could be important in the future. So it was done. This is on top of the hill. This water tank fed the camp, which was below the hill at Lower Meherabad. With an elevation of 50 feet, it gave good water pressure to the camp below the hill. Now we're looking at this photograph from Pune. It also represents a lot of the Pune people who were there at the early time. I thought it would be interesting for us to go through and just point out a few of these people. You probably have seen this photograph for years, but let's go through and describe some of these people and how they came to have a connection with Baba. First of all, the date is going to be later in 1920, at latest early 1921. This is Gustaji. He is sitting next to Merwanji. Gustaji was Baba's most important early disciple. He was sent to be Baba's disciple by Upasni Maharaj in December of 1918. So he's already been with Baba a few years. Sitting there on the chair, the first one on the left, is Dr. Ghani, Abdul Ghani, Baba's boyhood companion, who became reacquainted with Baba in 1920. The man a few seats to his left, that is the man with the garland, is Munshi Rahim. Munshi was also one of the early disciples of Baba, a very fine person, and it could have been his birthday, but I think, looking at this photograph, that it is probably a celebration of his going away to Bombay because he was promoted to a better position. He worked in a government supply house and he was promoted to a much higher position in Bombay. So I believe this is a celebration in honor of his promotion. It was at his home that these poetry readings and singing programs would be held, and many of these people would attend. So can you imagine going to a meeting where Merwanji is reciting the poetry that they all understand and interpreting the meaning, the deep meaning for them, and singing for them? Many of these are early disciples from that Pune period. So next to Dr. Ghani here, you see this man. His name was Ahmed Abbas. His nom de plume, as we knew him through the rest of his life, was Kak Saheb, also one of the early Muslim disciples of Baba from Pune, who was introduced to Baba by Babajan. The man sitting next to him his name is Syed Jamadar, also one of those early Muslim followers of Baba. Let's go all the way to the man in the white cap. That is Latif, also one of the early disciples of Baba, who gave Baba a bicycle in 1922 that Kodu, that is sailor, won in a raffle. Next to him is a man named Asar Saheb. Asar Saheb was one of the persons who co-translated, authored the Urdu version of Upasni Maharaj's biography with Kak Saheb, also one of the early Muslim disciples. The boy standing there, his name is Madho. Madho's history was that he was connected to Baba through the years. We don't hear much of him, but during the new life, he was the one assigned to keep watch at Meherabad when all the other Mandali were gone during the first phase. If we go to the next row, standing at left, the man in the white coat, his name is Maria. He was one of the early Hindu Mandali from Kasbapet, who was also one of the Manzalimim inmates. Standing next to him, to the right, is Bailey, the infamous also boyhood companion of Merwan, who did a great service by doing the dirty job of being a bad example, basically, through his life. It's a dirty job, but somebody had to do it. Standing next to him is Syed Saheb. Syed Saheb was the employee of Munshi, who he's standing behind. And it was Syed Saheb who ultimately told Munshi about Baba, although Munshi had seen Baba previously. And Munshi's first reaction to seeing Baba was that he was dumbstruck by his presence. So he had a deep connection. Now, if we go 2 men over, you see the man with the big mustache in the light coat. That, of course, is Baba's maternal uncle, Masaji, the father of Pendu and Naja. He was married to one of Shireen Mai's younger sisters. He was the one who died at Meherabad, and his body was buried there. And at his gravesite, Baba did the commemoration for the memorial tower in 1944. Standing next to him is also one of the early Kasbapet Hindu Mandali named Kondiram. He died about 1927. And the man on the end in the turban is Bapu Gante. Proper name is actually Tumbat, Bapu Tumbat. He's also known as Bapu Brahman. He also worked very often as a cook in the ashram, as did Masaji. If we go right back to the opposite side, the men standing on the top row, that is Gustaji's youngest brother, Adi, who is nicknamed Slamson by Baba. He spent a lot of time with Baba during the early days. Gustaji had 3 brothers. They all spent a good amount of time with Baba, at least during the 20s. The next man is Vital Bokre, also one of the early Pune disciples. If we go over 2, the man with the white turban and the tilak is Chiman Chaudhry. He was a disciple of Upasni Maharaj, who was also ordered to follow Baba. He was also a cook in the early days. Next to him is Yeshwanth Rao Baraokay, who was one of Upasni Maharaj's close disciples. He is the one that Upasni Maharaj is ordered to serve Baba whenever Baba was in Sakori. And he had the Kamli coat made for Baba. He was the one who gave the Kamli coat to Baba, that coat that Baba wore for 7.5 years and would wear no other coat. That coat that is in the museum now at Meherabad, and which by Baba's order can never leave India. He is the one who gifted Baba that coat. Standing next to him is Arjun Supekar, one of the very important early disciples, also from Kasbapet. He met Baba when Merwanji and Behramji opened that toddy shop in Kasbapet in 1918. He had a little tobacco stand across the street in that area, and Baba would often go there and visit with him. And he immediately became attracted to Baba and became a lifelong disciple. Of course, he died later. The last man on the end is Balatambat, also one of the early Kasbapet Mandali, also would do some cooking in the early days. But in the end, Baba put him on silence in 1929, and he mostly kept to himself through the years. He attended meetings, and Baba would bring him up for certain functions and things. But essentially, he did nothing much at all. He cooked for himself and lived in a very small room at Meherabad till he died in 1970. He was the one person close to Baba who was most successful at accomplishing doing nothing. That's by Baba's order. If you remember in the discourses, Baba explained that that is one way to unwind sanskars. He was an example of that. Some of you may have seen the video we did recently on Kaikushu Masa. Kaikushu Masa is the man standing here. He was married to Gulmai's sister Suna. Suna was the sister 1 year younger to Gulmai. And their daughter's name was Khorshid. So we knew her as Small Khorshid because Baba had a cousin who was also his older brother's wife named Big Khorshid. Kaikushu Masa was a very spiritually inclined person, one of the great early disciples of Baba. I wanted to do a presentation, a video on him, because the early disciples remembered him so fondly. Padre would remark about him from time to time. And so we did that. The end of the story here is that you see the woman sitting on the chair to Kaikushu Masa's right. That is his sister, Motabai. And in 1929, when Baba was in Kashmir, Kaikushu Masa was kidnapped by his two brothers and his business partner and taken back to Bombay, kept imprisoned in a small room in her house for over a year so that they could change his last will and testament so that Khorshid and Suna got very little besides a stipend to survive on and a clause for medical care. They did this because they were also very worldly people opposed to Meher Baba, and he had given so much of his wealth to Baba. They wanted to prevent him from doing that, so this was their way of preventing that. It's a tragic story, but a very beautiful story. This is my favorite photograph of these two women. And they look friendly here, but it wasn't always the case. On the right, of course, is Shireen Mai, Baba's mother, and on the left is Gulmai. They were actually second cousins. Shireen Mai's mother, Golandun, was the first cousin of Gulmai's father. So they were second cousins. And they met each other later in 1921-22. This is a beautiful photograph, but it doesn't show the animosity that Shireen Mai had for Gulmai. She didn't like that Baba would say he had a spiritual mother, another mother. And Shireen Mai was a very forthright person, strong person, and she could say some cruel things. Gulmai's fate in life, from the beginning, was to suffer. She worked hard as a child, suffered when she came to Ahmednagar. It was Sarosh Shavak who had picked her out to be the bride of his son. And Kaikushu Sarosh, who by this point now is known as Kanseb Kaikushu. Kanseb is a title bestowed upon someone. So now he became Kanseb of Ahmednagar. But she suffered because of his family. The extended family also involved Kanseb, Kaikushu's business partner, Kaikushu Elder, Sarosh's father, who was very vocal in criticizing Gulmai. But she was a person who was deeply spiritually inclined and very despondent about life in general until she met Upasi Maharaj. And the same day, and in Sikori, she met Merwanji. So she became closely devoted to both of them. Adi told us, though, more than once through the years, he saw Baba himself go to his mother and say, "Please forgive me for how my mother treats you." So she really went through it. But Baba said, "I will make you like Babajan." This photograph was taken probably in 1923. And this shows Kanseb Kaikushu and Gulmai and their two daughters, Piroja standing behind and Dali in front. These were the two daughters that were younger than Rustam and Adi. During this period, the saint Gilroy Shaw was closely associated with their family for many years. Gulmai would send him his meals every day. Gilroy Shaw was born in about 1830 in Baghdad. As a young man, he worked on ships, and eventually, whatever he did, he was so good at it that he became a member of the royal household, serving as a butler for Queen Victoria's household. Now, sometime in his early life, though, he was in India, and he had a master in the mountains in Madhya Pradesh somewhere who taught him pranayam, which he practiced apparently the rest of his life. You see, the interesting thing about this photograph is this supposed Muslim fakir has the Vaishnavite tilak on his forehead. That is something that is most haram to Muslims. But it is also a good example again, to show us that these highly advanced spiritual personalities were far beyond religion. These mediums were just how they worked. So this is a very fine photograph of Gilroy Shaw. We looked for this for years. Once, when we were looking for information about Gilroy Shaw, I happened to meet by chance within 5 minutes his great nephew in Ahmednagar, who just happened to be in town at the time, and asked him, are there any photographs? And he said, no. He was a wali, no photographs allowed. But here we caught him inadvertently. So to us, it's a fine thing to have. You may be aware that Baba mentioned that small Khorshid was Queen Victoria in her past life. These things are not something that the Mandali ever made a big deal of. I never heard them talk about it. But we know that Baba did mention that. What's interesting is here's the connection. From one lifetime to the next, these people are connected. The procession is proceeding. So Gilroy Shaw, about the time that Kansab Kaikhushru got the property at Arangaon, started asking Gulmai for a piece of property there. It was a quiet place. He wanted to be there so that he could be in peace. She put him off by telling him that it would be very difficult to supply him with meals every day if he was way out there. And what about all these people in town who liked to see? Time went on. The family had close association with him. But one day, in 1922, Gulmai had a dream. And in that dream, she saw a baby in her arms, on her lap, covered with a blanket. When she uncovered his face, it was Gilroy Shaw, who sat up in her lap and said, Ma, you have not yet given me my place to rest. Please, I'm tired. And she woke up and told her husband, Kansab Kaikhushru, about the dream, and that now they had to give him the property. Of course, Kansab was concerned that he was going to get a lot of trouble from first his brother-in-law, Elder Kaikhushru. And Gulmai said, his name isn't on the lease. He's got nothing to say about it. And the rest of the Zoroastrian community who harassed him in his business because of Gulmai's connection to these masters, spiritual personalities. Remember, the Zoroastrian culture had no heritage of spiritually advanced persons. It was just religious orthodoxy. There was one, some centuries earlier, but he was considered a pseudo-Zoroastrian, and he wasn't accepted by the Orthodox Zoroastrian. So the next day, Gulmai quietly sent a mason with Gilroy Shaw out in the Tongas, and he and some of his followers went there to Arangaon, to the camp, near that well. And he picked out a spot, drew that rectangular area on the ground, and while the mason was mixing mortar and squaring up the plot that would be designated as now his tomb site, some of his disciples started questioning him about picking the spot. And at the time, remember, it wasn't even clean. It was a ruins from an army camp that was there. There were dilapidated buildings and rubble everywhere in that area. And they asked him, why do you want to be out here? There's nothing here. It's desolate. It's a ruins. We could give you the choice of your best garden spots in Ahmednagar. Why would you want to be out here? His response was, you people are like children. You have no idea what this place is. Soon this place will belong to the world. Padre said he used the term Bara Sahib. The big chief is coming here. The great one is coming here. And after I die, whenever he passes by, the dust from his feet will settle upon my tomb. This is Baba in 1923. So there was also this issue. Their eldest son, Rustam, was going to be married, and they were having a problem finding a match for him. But eventually, as it was Baba's wish, Baba let the older women go through their process of picking a match for him, and eventually Baba told him that Franey, he named her Franey after his sister who had died earlier. Her name was Perosia. Baba named her Franey because they had so many Perosias already. Again, another name change. So that engagement was done. The day after Baba's birthday was celebrated in February of 1923 at Manzalimim. At the same time, Gulmai had some conversation with Baba, and Baba was saying, you know, Bombay is not the place for all these young men who stay with me. They need fresh air and hard work. So I want to take them out into the country somewhere where we can have a good, hearty life. And Gulmai said, well, Gilroy Shaw's been saying that you're going to come to Arangan. He said, it's a very good place. I should bring Upasi Maharaj and you there. Baba said, I may or may not come. And she said, by the way, Gilroy Shaw has been asking us for now 4 years to have a piece of this land out there for now his tomb, he says. Baba, without hesitation, said, you give him whatever he wants, and you make sure Kansip Kaikushu pays for everything. When they returned to Ahmednagar, Gilroy Shaw was informed, and he said, do it quickly. I want the pit prepared before he comes. Now, the plan was that Baba and some of the Mandali would attend the wedding of Rustam and Frani. That would be on May 9th, and sometime after that, when there was time, Gulmai would take him out to the property at Arangan. So after about 10 months, Manzali Meme was closed down about April 20th, and Baba with about a dozen of the Mandali came to Ahmednagar. They stayed for the first week or so in the Pushru quarters, we know it as the trust compound, and Baba did seclusion in the one room there by the corner for 1 week. After that, they went to Happy Valley for a few weeks. Feridun got his nickname Padri, and Aspandyar got his nickname Pendu. They stayed there through May 3rd, and they celebrated Upasi Maharaj's birthday there by feeding the local poor. But Baba was restless to return to Ahmednagar, so they walked back. A little before midnight, they left and walked the 10 miles back during the night. And the next morning, they were there. The relatives and friends had already been arriving in town for the wedding celebration, and many of them were also staying there at Kushru quarters. And of course, you know that Baba and many of the followers were Zoroastrians, but they were not like the Hindus and the Muslims. Most of the Zoroastrians considered Baba and his followers deluded or worse. Their attitude was that, how could this young man who grew up amongst them be anything special? Baba tolerated it through the years by his own direction. Baba tolerated this humiliating indignation of the Zoroastrian community and religious orthodoxy in general. Baba was already in an irritated mood on that morning of May 4th because Gulmai had gone to Sakori to celebrate Upasani Maharaj's birthday there with some of the other followers of Baba. And Adi had the responsibility of being Baba's orderly. And that morning, as he was helping Baba wash up, he mentioned that the atmosphere of criticism against Baba had developed there. And it was instigated mostly by Gulmai's brother, who was a doctor from Bombay. So Baba just abruptly walked away without saying anything, leaving Adi to inform the other Mandali. You may recall that one of their standing orders at the time was to follow Baba wherever and whenever he went. So they immediately dropped whatever they were doing and hurried to catch up. Instead of boarding a train, however, they went straight towards the station. Baba turned left there south and continued walking for another 5 miles. He came to that tree, that neem tree, near the well. There was a parapet around that tree at the time, and he sat there facing the east. And by this time, it was probably 11 or so in the morning. It was getting hot. He sat in the shade of the neem tree, and Baba commented that he liked the place. He said, look, there's a tomb, but nobody's there yet. And Padri told me this. Padri said that Baba, playing the fool, said, I wonder who owns this place. And Adi was there with them and said, oh, Baba, my father owns it. And Baba said, good, tell him to give it to me. This is not in the history, but this is what Padri told me. And though Adi was with them, he wasn't quite sure exactly what was what because he had never been to the property, but he knew that it was owned by his father. There were the 4 structures left in the camp at that time, besides all the dilapidated ones. The solid building was the post office building near the railway tracks, which was a pretty good sized building, about 18 feet by 30 feet, with a nice veranda around it, mostly to the east and a little to the south. There was that double water tank way up on the hill, a quarter mile away, that is now Meher Retreat. There was a bathing room of brick with high ventilator windows. And there was an old mess quarter building, which was a standard-sized bungalow from the camp days. We now know it as the old bungalow. They explored the property a little bit. Baba sent Beramji and Slamson to Arangan to see what they could find for food. And he ran into a few people there, an old carpenter who had some bakri made, the unleavened millet bread, standard bread of the people in that part of India. So he gave them that. He gave them a bucket with a rope so they could get water from the well and drink. They had settled then on the post office veranda. Around that time, Rustam arrived on his motorcycle. He had followed Baba's path by inquiring from people along the way. Now, understandably, Rustam was anxious, and he asked Baba why he left. Baba just said, "I don't want to stay anywhere where we are not welcome." And Rustam asked, "But what about attending the wedding? I've only agreed to getting married because you said you would attend the wedding." Baba said, "I've changed my mind." He said, "In that case, we'll call the whole thing off. I'm not getting married." Baba pacified him and assured him that it was his wish that he and Franny should get married. And a compromise was struck. He said, "Look, you have your wedding, do all that, and then afterwards come to me for my blessing. In the meantime, it's better we stay out here, out of the way, and just send all the Mandali's luggage out here." They spent that day looking around, making a list of materials they might need. And the next day, Rustam sent out the luggage and some of the material that they would need to clean and repair some of the buildings there. In the evening, that old carpenter came to the camp and gave Baba and the Mandali a kerosene lamp so they'd have some light. And Baba told him, "Your house will always have light." And this man was an old Christian, and Baba gave him the nickname Ajuba. He also became one of Baba's lifelong disciples. That first day, as they were eating, Baba was giving the men a lecture on the importance of clean drinking water and how they had to filter the water through a certain type of cotton cloth. And Pendu, still very thirsty from the morning walk, went to take a drink from the matka, the clay pot there. And from across the veranda, Baba had a ladle in his hand, and he threw it and hit Pendu in the head just as he was about to take a drink, which shocked Pendu. They came to find out there was a dead lizard in that clay pot, and Pendu would have been at least very sick or possibly died from poisoning. So Baba allowed that they would at least be close by for the wedding. He came back to Ahmednagar on the 8th of May, stayed at Sarosh Manzil, which was the new house that had been built by Kanseb and Gulmai a few years before. Baba and Gustaji stayed in the upper floor, and the rest of the Mandali stayed in the main lower hall. This is a photograph of the wedding gathering on May 9th. You can see Rustam and Franny there, and this is a big group of people here. Now, we're going to zero in on a few of these people so you can get a better look. This is in front of the Parsi Agyari. This is showing Rustam and Franny. Some of the people you'll be interested in seeing. Behind Franny is Daulat Mai, off her left shoulder. That's Daulat Mai. Behind Rustam, right next to his right shoulder, that woman there is Goher and Katie's mother, Khorshid. And now right next to her is Gulmai, and she had to bear the brunt of all of this organization. Baba's disciples didn't get involved because of the enmity of the Zoroastrian community. They got involved as much as they could, but they couldn't do much for her regarding organizing the event. She had to do all of this on her own. The girl with the long hair front right is Goher and Katie's eldest sister, Sidla. And I believe this little girl standing next to her is Katie, right there. This is Kanseb standing there up on the left. Two down from him, that's Kakushu Masa, his brother-in-law, which is Small Khorshid's father. Shireen Mai is standing right in front of him. Right next to Shireen Mai is Naja, Pendu's sister, Baba's first cousin. Hiding behind the girl is Suna. She was short. That is Gulmai's sister, Khorshid's mother. That's Firoja. And the one to her left is Dolly. Behind Dolly's shoulder, the girl with the long hair, that is Khorshid. Khorshid is 13 years old. This is how Khorshid looked when she became a dedicated disciple of Meher Baba at the age of 13. She was just a small girl. Standing next to Khorshid, the boy in the cap, is Adi Jr., Baba's brother. And the girl in front of Piroja, that's money. And the girl down from her, the small girl, that is Goher. Baba ordered the Mandali to help prepare for the wedding feast. So they worked cutting vegetables and serving, and of course they were on a strict vegetarian diet. So while all the Zoroastrian and Muslim people had a nice biryani or pulao, whatever it was, there was a vegetable dish that was supposed to be cooked for the Mandali and the vegetarians. And of course Baba went there when it was all complete and ready and inspecting, doing his usual thing, asking questions. Oh, and you did this, and you made that like this, and you made this, nice. And so what are the utensils you used? Oh, we just used the same one. You used the same for the non-veg as the veg. So then they ordered the Mandali, you don't eat anything. So now the Mandali were working and not eating anything. And then when they came to serve, the guests at the wedding reception treated them like ghosts. So in the end, Ramju remarked that they didn't feel welcome as guests or as servants, and they went hungry. Afterwards, the wedding couple came back to Sarosh Manzil, and Baba embraced them and blessed their marriage. Kawal was called, there was music. The other people also enjoyed a lot, but the atmosphere of hostility against Baba continued behind his back. Gulmai's brother openly accused Baba of trying to usurp their property at Arangaon. She would argue that there's no question of usurpment if they wanted him to be there. And that was the beginning of really the end of the relationship with Gulmai and her brother. They really had not much to do with each other for the rest of their lives. Of course, Baba came to know of all the quarreling at Sarosh Manzil. And so, again, they picked up and walked away on the morning of the 11th. They walked to the Dharmshala near the station and spent the night there discussing where they might go. All their belongings were picked up again from Meherabad. This was so typical of Baba. Back and forth with all these supplies and things. Carried through the town from the Dharmshala near the station on their backs and stored them at Kushu quarters, which was a storage facility, until they were going to leave. Gulmai's heart sunk when she heard that Baba was leaving. And then after they returned to the Dharmshala, Kaikushu came to speak with Baba, and he pleaded, on behalf of my family, I beg your forgiveness for the way you and your people were treated, Baba. Please stay and feel free to make use of the property at Arangaon. Baba answered, a fakir has no home, and at the same time, he owns everything. He only stays in one specific place for certain reasons. I do not wish to create differences or divide your family by staying in Arangaon. Kansab said, I don't care what others think. I care about Gulmai. And right now she is beside herself with grief over what has happened. So please accept my prayer. Remain in Arangaon. Baba was touched by Kansab's appeal. So this is how he agreed to stay there in Arangaon. The next day, May 13th, they returned to the property and they resided in the post office while they did the work for the next few weeks of cleaning and repairing the old bungalow, the mess quarters bungalow. One day soon after that, Baba called Gulmai and Suna and their daughters to the Arangaon property, and they continued to show Baba around. They had Baba's darshan, accompanied him to the hill, looking at the big tank. And Baba told Gulmai, this is the perfect place for my work. Will you give it to me? Gulmai said, yes, Baba, it's already yours. Everything is yours. Why do you even have to ask? Baba told Gulmai that he would take 2 of her children to be with him, while the other 2 could live in the world. So of the sons, Adi was the one who stayed with Baba, but Rustam was also a close disciple, except that Baba wanted Rustam to live that worldly life, to be in the world but not of it. Baba told Gulmai that he wanted her daughter Piroja to be married. And Gulmai's sister Suna was there too, and Khorshid was with them. As Baba was walking swiftly down the hill, Khorshid got nervous when she saw that Baba told Piroja to get married. So she ran after Baba and caught him down the hill and said, Baba, wait, I have something to tell you. Baba stopped and said, yeah, tell me, what is it? Khorshid said, please, Baba, never give me an order to marry. Please, because I only want to stay with you. And Baba said, yes, it's all right. I know everything. My Nazar is on you. So don't worry. You'll be safe. I will never tell you to marry. Frainie's only sister, Mera, that is, Daulat Mai had two daughters, Frainie and the younger sister, Mera. Mera did not attend Frainie's wedding. She had been staying in Sakori, working with the nuns there, doing physical labor. And a few days before the wedding, Mera's knee became painfully stiff and swollen for no apparent reason. Because of this, Maharaj would not allow her to attend the wedding, saying, how would it look to have this girl there? You want to put a fancy dress on her and make her wear those heeled shoes and she'll be limping around with that bad knee? No. He said, I can't let her go there. But there was another reason behind it. That reason was because one of their relatives wanted to get Mera engaged to her nephew. In the big divine scheme of things, this was not meant to be. So Mera had seen Baba at Sakori in October 1922, some months before, but she had never spoken to Baba or met Baba. But this relative of theirs wanted to pursue this marriage thing. So the issue had not yet been resolved. And Daulat Mai, that is Mera's mother, who was absolutely dedicated to Baba as one of his disciples, would never do anything unless Baba approved of it. So on the 19th of May, they came to Meherabad and met Baba there at the post office. Daulat Mai and some of the older women, including Baba's own mother, Shireen Mai. Gul Mai was there, Mera and Frainie. Now Frainie is married. Mera is there, 16 years old. When they arrived, Baba was busy working with the men at the mess quarter bungalow. So the women were told to wait at the post office while Baba cleaned up, and he gave them all his darshan, each in turn. And this was Mera's first interaction, really, with Baba. Then the topic of marriage for Mera came up, and against the traditional wishes of some of the older women present, including his own mother, Baba allowed Mera to make her own decision. Though she was only 16 years old and shy, Mera asserted that she never wanted to marry, ever. And Baba ordered the others never to bring up the subject again. And that was that. So now there was Khorshid and Mera, who were dedicated to stay with Baba, to be his close women disciples, along with their mothers. This is a picture of the old bungalow, much as it would have looked in 1923, where they did the repair. And this room here, that is in the forefront, is the southeast corner. That was Baba's selected room at that time. On the right side over there, you see that enclosed, but in 1923, that veranda was not enclosed over there. The work of refurbishing the old bungalow went on all day, every day, until it was finished on the 22nd. And that evening, Baba and each of the Mandali carried their bedding and baggage to the bungalow. Baba assigned a space for each of the men and took that small room on the southeast corner of the building for himself. They rolled out their bedding and settled in, but as soon as they were about to go to sleep that night, Gustaji found a lump under his bed, which turned out to be a snake. Padri promptly killed it and threw it out. They had killed plenty of scorpions up to that point, but they had never seen a snake there before, and they were wondering how it would even get in. Baba decided they should go back to the post office just to be on the safe side. So after carrying everything back and settling back in the post office, Baba started to remark that there were too many scorpions and snakes around Arangaon. So he told the men to think of another place to go. This is after all those weeks of work. Really speaking, the work had been done and the foot was in the door. And so now Baba said, think of another place to go. So Pendu had been working in Quetta for Goher's father, way up in the north, and he suggested that the climate there was very pleasant in the summer. So Baba agreed to travel north, and within a few days, they were on the move again. But before they left the place, Baba named it. He ordered Nervous to paint a signboard, and it was mounted on a couple of posts planted near the railway tracks by the post office. And the sign read, Meherabad, Meherabad. That photograph showing now is one taken of Baba during that time. That was taken in Quetta by Goher's father's brother, who was one of the good early photographers. This next image is one of those photographs taken in Quetta after the men had spent several days out in the weather, having a good time up there in the mountains, in the streams, and climbing around. And Bob in front, of course. This is before they started a big trek returning back and traveling through Gujarat. This is interesting because this is one of the first times where they're going to wander and they're going to dress in a particular fashion. This is kind of similar to what happened in the New Life. So let's start in the front left here. Besides Baba in the front center, that is Jal, Baba's brother Jal. Next is Gustaji. Next is Adi. Next to him, Beramji. That is Slamson. The next one is Babu Bale, Babu Saikwala. Next to him is Pendu. And next to him is Nervous. Back right, that's Padri there. The next one is Asma, who was a first cousin of Adi and Khurshid. Behind is Ramju. Then Baidu. Masaji is next. And this is Abdur Rahman, who is nicknamed Barsop on the end. All of these people are prominent in some way in the early history and the early history of Meherabad. They were on that trip to Quetta. So they traveled during the next several weeks, but all during this time, Baba continued his habit of a liquid diet. They returned to Meherabad on July 9th for 3 days, and that evening, for the first time in over 5 months, Baba ate a little rice and dal, some solid food with the Mandali at Meherabad. They spent most of the coming months in Bombay. Some of the Mandali were busy publishing and distributing the biography of Upasi Maharaj in the different languages at that time. This photograph was taken in Ghatkopar by a man named Keki Irani. These are also some of the early disciples. This was from a trek from Bombay to Sakori. Baba had the Mandali go in, but he did not now go to Sakori. He never stepped back into Sakori while Upasi Maharaj was still in the body after leaving there in October of 1922. In the front left, this is Burjo Dayawala, who resided next to Manjali Meen. He and his wife became close followers of Baba from that time. Adi K. Irani is next. Ramju is next. The man on this right is Raghunath Karmakar. You remember Upasi Maharaj's very close disciple, his spiritual mother, Durga Mai? She was the mother of Raghunath. He was with Baba on this trip, but he was not very attentive in obeying Baba. He didn't listen to Baba, and in frustration, Baba would stop speaking for periods during that trek. This is the first time that the Mandali noticed that Baba would keep silence. Generally, he was very talkative. The next row, Beramji. Next is Rustam, then Baba Ghani next, and Gustaji. In the back, Babu Ubale, the famous cricketer, Homi Vasifdar. Sarosh, this is Sarosh next. Baidul is after him. And this is Slamson, Gustaji's youngest brother. And this is Nervous on the end. Baba quietly returned to Meherabad on December 3rd with only Gustaji and Beramji to stay in secret seclusion in the post office during the month of December, the last 4 weeks of 1923. He continued his seclusion in Bombay and then made a first quick trip to Iran with some of the Mandali. This is Padri. This is his passport photo from that year, that first trip to Iran in 1924. They left late February, were there in early March. It wasn't a very fun trip, and it wasn't a very successful trip in the sense that all Baba could do is step down and into the land. As soon as they were about to leave the ship, Padri had a spike in a fever, a very high fever. It was so bad that they had to bring him onto the ship. They tried again, and as soon as Padri was brought onto the soil of Iran, his fever spiked. So again, they left. They went down the coast a little bit, and Baba said, one more time, we'll go. And Baba and some of the Mandali went in. Again, Padri's fever spiked, so he had to be taken back to the ship. Behramji and Baidul stayed in Iran, but the rest of them, all Zoroastrians, by the way, returned to India with Baba. They were traveling through the north, and at one point, Baba sent all the Mandali back home. He traveled alone for a week around North India and never explained exactly what he was doing, but we assume that he was doing much of what he had done in later years, that is, contacting spiritually advanced persons. But this time he was doing it alone. It was the only time in his life as Meher Baba that he was alone like that. After a week, he returned to Ahmednagar and told Adi to inform the Mandali to gather at Meherabad. Now Gilroy Shaw's tomb was no longer vacant because he had dropped his body on January 16th while Baba was actually in Bombay. His body was carried to Meherabad in a procession with a brass band and buried without religious ceremony as per his wish. There's a beautiful plaque in the translation. It's a great statement of a spiritually advanced person, and it is emblematic of Meherabad. Before ever coming to Meherabad, Baba had been warning the Mandali that staying with him in the future would require their doing a lot of strenuous labor. This phase coming up was known as Gamela Yoga. And since they had no beasts of burden then, the men had to carry loads and push the hand carts they had themselves. After their return to Meherabad, they spent the first days demolishing the dilapidated structures that remained from the camp. Mostly they were between the road and the railway line. The rubble was cleared, low spots were filled, the grounds were leveled. Baba ordered a small room to be constructed for his personal use about 130 feet to the east from the road there. With the help of Ajaba, the old carpenter and his crew from Arangan, and a mason from Ahmednagar, the Mandali worked as the laborers. And though he continued his very meager diet, Baba was intent on finishing the work as quickly as possible. He worked alongside the others, making sure the job was done per his requirements. You've seen it, this hut, which is less than 7 feet wide by 8 feet long inside, was built within 10 days in April 1924. That's the summer there. Its rock walls are 16 inches thick, and you'll remember that there is a small window that was set on each side of the building at a low height. And there was a specific reason for this, which becomes clear later. The original roof structure was teakwood bullies, that's poles, and Mangalore clay tiles. The ceiling actually in this room is very high. The thick rock walls and the high ceiling keep the room cool. A typical day for the Mandali at that time was to wake up at 5 a.m. Then each one prayed for 2 hours, customary to their respective religions. And it wasn't that Baba encouraged religious practices, but rather that he used any lingering religious impressions of the men in his spiritual work with them, through them, which was for them and for all those they were connected to. Breakfast was at 7 a.m., bakri, and wheat tea without milk, as much as you like. After breakfast, the day's labor would begin. By noon, it was already very hot under the intense summer sun, and they would break to bathe and have lunch, which was a cooked vegetable and more bakri. Then they could wash clothes, rest, have more milkless tea. But shaving was not allowed because Baba had passed a rule then that as of the beginning of Gamela Yoga, their stay at Meherabad now, no one was allowed to shave. It was not only about saving time, but it was also an exercise in indifference to personal appearance. Because in India at that time, young men didn't wear beards. It was not popular like it is now. At that time, old men wore beards or sadhus, and they didn't want to identify with being an old man or a sadhu. So this was also about an indifference to personal appearance, which also had something to do with kind of provoking the Orthodox family traditions. For an hour and a half from 3 to 4:30 p.m., the men were to chant this early version of the 7 names of God. The first time you hear of it, it was Khuda, Paramatma Allah, Ahuramazd, Ram Yazdanhu. And this was preceded and followed by a recitation of the poem The Horizon of Love, which Baba had composed at Mandali. Remember, during this time, Baba was composing poetry as Huma still. While he was speaking, he was still composing. So from 4:30 to 6, the men again attended their various assigned duties while it was a little cooler. And those who were weak or in poor health had to either bring water from the well to the post office building where they were staying at the time, or help with the kitchen work. Dinner was more vegetable with bakri or bread and was served at 6. During this period of strenuous work, Baba did allow the men to have 2 or 3 almonds a day to build up their strength. In the evening, Baba would give a discourse or sing, and when he would sing, in those days, he would usually keep rhythm by playing the dholak, and Adi would often accompany Baba by playing sitar. And by 10 p.m., the men would generally retire. During those early years, Baba allowed the Hindus to prepare their food separately from the others, as was their habit. And because they gave importance to their religious commemorations, he encouraged the Hindus to observe and celebrate them while appearing to be indifferent to the important holidays of the other religions. And this contrast would bring out any unexpressed religious or cultural resentment any of the men might have, which Baba would very masterfully make them aware of before wiping out the impressions, showing them this is nothing. Let this pettiness go. As was the habit with the Pasi Maharaj's ashram, Lord Ram's birthday was celebrated, and on that year it was April 13th. It was the first time a mandap was set up before the Jopti. And they had a bhajan singer there, and this singer also told stories of the life of Ram. A simple meal of rice and dal got the mandali prepared for the next day, which was the typical thing you find at Meherabad in those early years. It's called a bandara, which was a mass feeding. This bandara took place the next day, but that evening Baba gave a discourse about surrender to the perfect master, and he made one of those statements about Meherabad. Once I settle here, the atmosphere of this place will be greatly heightened spiritually and materially. I have a great mission to perform in my life for the benefit of humanity, the outcome of which will be observed in the near future. The next day they prepared and fed about 1,000 people, and it was that afternoon that Baba actually gave the name to the building, the Jopti. On the 16th, the men began the work of refurbishing the bathroom building. They hadn't gotten to that yet. It was a building he wanted to reserve for women's quarters, so they got to work refurbishing that. It was one of the few solid structures there. Baba found Padri and Ramju chatting idly for a few minutes, and he threw a stick he had in his hand, which just whizzed by Padri's head to catch his attention. So later, in front of some of the other men, Padri showed his blistered palms to Baba like that. Baba's response was, "You people swear you are ready to give up your very life for me, but blisters make you complain? This is not even the beginning of giving up your life, yet you're whimpering and crying. It is a sin to complain in this path, where for years on end, the body is cut bit by bit, remaining wounded until it gives up the ghost. So seal your lips and let me kill you slowly, inch by inch. Bravery is this, not in showing me the blisters on your palms." The average guy might say, maybe this life is a little harsh for me. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. But to Padri, Baba's abuse was poetry. However, his hands were badly swollen, so he couldn't work anymore. So he was taken to Ahmednagar for medical treatment and recuperation. In his absence, then Ramju became the manager of Meherabad, taking over Padri's duties and awakening the mandali at 5 o'clock each morning. However, the next evening, then Ramju began to suffer from a high fever. And a few days later, Baba expressed his unhappiness with the other men's lack of attention to Ramju, who was sick, and threatened to leave Meherabad with only Nervous as a companion if the responsibility of managing was not taken. Padri had returned by that point, and he agreed to manage the labor, but it wasn't practical to oversee more. Now, most of the work was happening around the Jopti, but they were residing in the post office across the road, say 100 plus yards away. After some discussion, Gustaji agreed to be the home manager at the post office. The arduous labor in the intense summer heat with the meager diet tested the patience of these men, and the occasional tiffs and arguments were inevitable. And on top of that, Baba took the opportunity to scold the men for any lapse of attentiveness. He was giving them a crash course in forbearance and tolerance. Resentment had been festering for several days between Barsop, who was a more orthodox Muslim, and Gustaji, who was in charge of the stores. Barsop had asked Gustaji for a new carpet for offering namaz, but his request was refused. One day, Barsop became very angry and, not mincing his words and abusing Gustaji. Baba loved all of this drama. While the Mandali were with Baba that evening, Baba asked Barsop, "Has your anger against Gustaji subsided?" Barsop admitted that it had not. Baba proceeded to give the Mandali a good pep talk about self-control. Then, to make them practice controlling anger, he gave them 2 orders. Each morning, every member of the Mandali should touch the feet of every other and say, "You are my brother." And during the 24 hours of the day, if anyone expresses anger and speaks bitterly to anyone else, I should be informed immediately. And I will then fall at the offender's feet and salute him. And being a Muslim, Barsop protested that the first rule was against the Shariat of his religion. Baba explained that the rule only required the touching of the feet with both hands. There is no question of bowing down or laying one's head at another's feet. However, Barsop insisted that it was against the Shariat to touch the feet of another, so Baba allowed Barsop to only have to shake hands with the other men instead of touching their feet. Ramju was also a Muslim, so Baba then asked him, "Do you find any religious difficulty in following this?" And Ramju replied, "I don't consider the rules to be against the Shariat, and I accept the first rule, but I will not report to you and allow you to touch my feet." Padri and Nervous also refused to abide by the second rule. But after Baba explained the whole thing to them, that it was his order, they agreed. Taking Ramju aside, then Baba told him, "Look, you've done exactly what Barsop did. Accept my wish on principle and carry it out without the least hesitation. What Shariat can exceed my wish? My wish is religion, and my wish is Shariat. He who obeys it obeys the Shariat and fulfills the tenets of his religion. Always be mindful of my wish, regardless of anything else." Ramju protested, "But I would not like it if you touched my feet. I revere you." Baba answered, "Why do you talk about likes and dislikes? You should like whatever I like. If you don't follow my wish, how can you revere me? You cannot be a slave to your own wish and revere me at the same time." But Ramju pleaded, "It would break my heart to see you touching my feet." And Baba responded, "Well, maybe it would break my heart not to touch your feet." Ramju couldn't say anything else. With the lesson learned, Baba freed him from observing the second rule also, telling him not to worry and forget about it. Around this time, Baba had this place of residence, or the seat, called the seat of the master. It was the Jopti. The Mandali wanted a flag to mark it. So on April 23rd, there was a debate spontaneously taking place. The Hindus wanted the traditional orange or red flag that you see at the holy sites of the masters, the saints. Ramju objected, claiming that green was better. That's the real Hazrat, have the green flag. And the Hindus protested that green was a Mohammedan color, of course, and the Zoroastrians didn't like either idea. So Baba settled the issue by proposing that the flag should be of 7 colors. The bottom should be red and the top sky blue. And you've probably read Baba's explanation spiritually of what those colors means. And he told them, basically, you argue amongst yourselves about the 5 in the middle. And Dina Talati sewed the flag that first day. And you may wonder, what? Dina Talati is a woman, and she was the wife of Naval. Naval was one of the Mandali there. Where was she? The old bungalow had been fixed, and the old bungalow at that time was used as a dharamshala for a few women. It wasn't that she was residing at Meherabad, but she was there, and she sewed that flag on that day. So Baba's 7-colored flag that we see was established on that day, flown over the Jopti on April 23rd, 1924. Now we're going into questions and answers.
Betty Lohman is going to take over for the question and answer session.
Peter, have you studied so thoroughly? How far do you go to current times?
I've studied Baba's life and work, yes, but I have focused on the early years because I realized at a certain point that those years were somewhat overlooked. Remember that the Mandali, living with Baba, had some responsibility of recording events for posterity, but then at a point they let it go because their constant meditation was, what does he want next? In this way, years went by, and when we first came there, we heard so much of the recent history of the Mandali, which was fresh to them, and those people who were still young as Mandali at that time. So the early history, we largely gleaned from the old disciples, but even then, it wasn't always fresh. You know, I would ask Padre a question, and the typical answer of his was, well, I'll have to think about it, mister. You know, I have 50 or 60 years of film footage to review here. So it was like that. But putting the pieces together is the thing. People ask me about this because they would like to know if there's a quick way to just imbibe it. And I just tell them, I don't think so. It has taken me many years of contemplation. And I think because I also had worked as a builder and a technical person, I have a mind that thinks in logical progression so that pieces have to work together and fit together. You can't just assert something that kind of looks like it might be the thing. It has to be exact. So we have to know what we can say is a fact and what we don't. Once that's accomplished, that's the foundation. Once that's accomplished, the beauty of these stories is there. And for an example, when we're talking about the Gamela Yoga time, it was recorded, but many of the stories were too poignant. The Mandali didn't talk about some of these things. It was too much. And especially, I will say that while many of the old Mandali were alive, some of the other people who were involved were still alive, and they didn't want to ruffle any feathers. It was too emotional for some people, so we just let things be. I had observed that.
Thank you. You mean poignant, you mean just deeply, deeply emotional? Is that what you mean? Or sad?
Coming up in the next session, I'm going to get to some of these stories from this Gamela Yoga phase. This is about Baba's establishing Meherabad, and it has to do with him using these mediums. The first medium he had to work against was traditional cultural orthodoxy, and how always traditional cultural orthodoxy works against God. So he had to suffer that and work through it, but he was firm. Immediately when we begin the next session, we'll be into that.
Peter, thank you for the wonderful presentation. This is kind of an unrelated question, but you said anything will be okay. When we look at those pictures of early Meherabad, it is a rather desolate-looking place.
Yes.
And yet I understand 100 years earlier or so, before the British Navy got in there and cut down all the forests and basically made ships out of them, that even Erangel had, doesn't Erangel mean forest?
Aran means forest, yes. Aran.
Yeah. So at one time, that was a rather forested area.
Yes, it's true.
And it's interesting that now it is kind of returning a little bit.
Yes.
The effort being made there to replant.
As you know, the soil for the most part isn't very good, especially in the higher topography in that area. It's very rocky and trees don't grow well there. what was left of the good organic base probably eroded away. Most of that was done in the 19th century. I can tell you that it must have been pretty desolate by 1878 when there was a big famine in India, 1877, 6, 7, and 8, because that's when the British had this tree planting program. So the big neems that we saw alongside of the road going to Meherabad, and the big neems, the mature neems alongside of the road at Meherabad, we have 3 that we managed to save. All the rest now are gone because of the road expansion. Originally, we have 3 from 1878 that were planted by record, 1878. That one is the important tree that Baba first sat beneath. The second is the Duni, which is a very important tree. And there's another one to the north of that, all on the same side. We were able to save those 3 trees by moving the road right-of-way to the west slightly when the highway was expanded. This cut into what we call historic Meherabad Park now, a little bit. So it cut into where, let's say, Saidar Bar was. We lost that tree near the post office path, but it was dying anyway. Those were the only trees at the time. Most of this was cut off for firewood and charcoal.
Oh.
Before they had access to a lot of coal, steam engines would run on firewood too, before they had access to a lot of coal in India. So they burned all of this as needed. Even when we were younger, burning firewood was kind of a liberal thing to do. Now it's not so much so, but 100, 200 years ago it was. You have it, burn it.
So the forests were really more firewood than they were shipbuilding materials. Then.
Oh, the good timber, as you know, good timber is always for lumber.
Yeah.
But most of it becomes firewood, charcoal.
I often wondered how it seemed to me like that was a long way from the ocean to being that lumber. And if it was being used for shipbuilding, it seems like it'd take quite a bit of lumber to make a ship.
Yes. And I imagine what species they had then. Acacia was not a friendly wood for carpenters to work, so they weren't going after that for lumber. It's really good quality if you have the right, as you know, carbide bits to work it. And neem also is a very hard wood. These were not woods of choice, but they were superb as fuel woods. Superb. And remember, going back 200 years, a lot of the fuel in the world was charcoal. It wasn't so much coal. Coal was just beginning. Coal really began with the steam engine. Now we've digressed into a whole other technology here, but
yeah.
Well, Melanie has a question.
Hey, Peter. How are you,
Hi,
Jay
Melanie.
Baba?
Jay Baba.
How are you, Jay Baba? I wanted to ask, because I am horrible about things like this. When did you first come to Meherabad or whatever, and sort of in the area of your research, speaking to everybody, even in the earlier years, were you taking a lot of notes and maintaining a lot of notes, or only it was after that you really thought about it and kind of went back to...
Yes. You know, I first went to Meherabad the end of 1974. I had just turned 20 years old, and then I went. I was not a person of means. My goal in high school was to get to the center to meet those old ladies who lived with Meher Baba in India. And after that, my goal was just to spend my life absorbed in Meher Baba. But I realized within a year or so that I could work hard and get to India. So I just spent most of my early life working to earn money to be able to be in India.
So had you heard about Baba when you were in high school, you said?
I heard about Baba when I was in high school, yes.
Mm.
By the time I got out of high school, I was a dedicated Baba lover.
So at what point did you start to really document a lot of...
As I say, when we were younger, it was casual conversation to us. Well, I can tell you that I remember seeing Money, for an example, when she was telling a story and somebody would pull out a notepad and a pen and she'd give them a look like, we're family here. As if you're missing it. You're missing the love. So don't do that. So what happened is gradually they all passed away and then we're all sitting in it. was that something? So we'd have to remember these points. And as I say, fortunately, I have a good memory. And then I could start putting the pieces together. And sometimes it would take me months to pin down some detail about something. But logical deduction is a very good thing when it comes to details. And by cross-referencing and discerning different sources, we can really nail down some things. I found some things through photographs and other places that I never heard from the Mandali. But I could tell, oh, this is it. This is the way that works. And photographs tell a lot of stories. So I didn't really start documenting things till much later, even making the film God in Human Form. The reason we started doing that is because, first of all, the technology was new, and then almost anyone could be a filmmaker. So I didn't know about making films. I only knew what I wanted to see. But my friend, Bob Fredericks, was really tinkering a lot in the technology. So Bob helped me a lot, and we did this. I did the script for God in Human Form one winter in India because my spine was giving me so much trouble that the doctor ordered me to lie down for 20 minutes for every hour I was on my feet, and I needed something to do. And so this is what I did. I would lie in the bed and dictate something, and Debbie would type it, and we just worked it out gradually, and it became the film God in Human Form. I was reading just now from a script that I've been writing for a number of years. Whenever I get a chance to work on it, I haven't been focusing on it diligently because we have a lot of other work that keeps me from doing that. That is basically what I was looking at. The notes I was reading from were from the script for a documentary series of Meherabad, which is supposed to be a full story of Baba's life and work at Meherabad. The problem is, it's very long. I tried to start with a skeleton to see how concise it could be and realized that I had to abandon that ship very quickly. So at this point, I'm at about 187,000 words, and I'm just through the New Life meetings. So I haven't even really started on the Sahavas programs of the 50s and later. But the stories are too good, I tell you. There is no place like Meherabad. I think it's important for the people who will be coming in the future to be able to understand something, even in their own languages. We have people interested to do this in 9 languages at this point, but it's going to take some work. Maybe it'll get done before I die. I don't know. See what happens.
We do have another question, Steve.
Peter, I assume it's very unlikely, but what do you think are the chances that someday an audio of Baba's voice will be discovered?
There won't be an audio of Baba's voice except for the one that we have, which is the film from 1932 of Baba in New York going, And I've given that to somebody who hasn't done anything with it. But Baba going, to me is a pretty cool thing. I mean, I just imagine it as, how would you like to go to sleep at night with the earphones on and listen to Meher Baba going, That is as much as we'll ever get. But I'm confident that it can be picked out and improved with the technology today. It shouldn't be a thing, though, and I understand that Baba would keep that from happening so that it wouldn't become a thing, a sensational thing. Baba never liked sensational things. There's another reason I think it hasn't come out, because the time isn't right yet. I do believe Meher Baba going, could have some impact on the world. The time isn't right, it's not happening.
Thank you.
Your dear wife has her hand up.
Hello, dear. What I wanted to clarify is that Peter's been doing extensive research with combined diaries, Chanji's diaries, other diaries, that you're all able to see these scans, these handwritten scans on the Trust website, but it takes a long time to actually read that handwriting
and to pull a lot of these stories out. And Ward, I mean, the work he has done has just been amazing. So these are some of the sources for
Yes.
putting together this
Yeah.
whole tapestry of Baba's history.
There are the different diaries. Now, the combined diaries are the early works that talk about this period coming up after the one we're in right now. Gamela Yoga only had the diaries of Ramju and a few comments by a few of the other Mandali at the time, Adi, Madri. These are stories, but during the first long stay, which begins the end of January 1925, we have well-documented diary histories of life at Meherabad. Ajuba, the old carpenter from Oregon, was one of those diarists of the time. He contributed a lot. So Ward and I worked together occasionally, and one of the projects we're working on is the combined diaries. Not only to edit these things, to give proper context. And now with the internet, when something is mentioned, we can give a website digression, not a website, what do you call it? An internet digression. In other words, Baba was in this place and he walked across this bridge.
Hyperlink.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, that stuff. You can go directly to that and see a photograph from within a few years of the way that bridge looked at the time Baba walked over it, let's say, something like that. So we're trying to give this whole thing a very nice perspective and context, and also to give some peripheral information about some of these characters. Remember, at the time when these diaries were done, a lot of things were casually mentioned, and everybody assumed, well, you know who that is. Everybody knows who that is. But no, nobody remembers who any of those people are. So we have to go through and kind of describe, give a little definition. Chanji's diaries are most in depth, but they are also scattered to a degree because he did three separate things. He did diary notes, and then he did diary outlines, and then he did his final diary entries. And sometimes you get 3 different pages involving that same day. So you have to go through the whole history and bring it back and give it perspective and context through editing by eliminating extraneous detail and focusing on the point he's trying to get across. Another part of the problem with Chanji's diaries is that after Baba dropped the body, Anis Hassan went there to India and he wanted to microfilm all of these things. So he took Chanji's diaries and microfilmed them all, but he couldn't keep track of everything and he kind of put it all back together in kind of a jumble, which Adi Kairani was not happy about, but it had happened. Anyway, I started from the beginning, but because I was exposed to the whole thing so much, I was able to catch one page that had been placed 7 years away in the collection and bring that back to the very beginning of the diaries. So you really have to have so much time and exposure to the material to be able to remember where everything is going. If you lose your focus, you have to start again. I see that we have reached
It's lunchtime.
Lunchtime.
noontime your time. Okay?
Noontime.
Jay Bob.